Joining us now, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author and columnist. His new book, A Nice Little Place on the North Side, all about Wrigley Field and the Chicago Cubs. It is our honor and privilege to welcome George Will to America's Forum. George, thanks for your time. Even before I went to Congress, when I was the spring training voice of the Cubs at Hohokam Park in Mesa, there you were. You have been a lifelong Cubs fan. I am interested in this book and the blood, sweat, and yes, tears of frustration that came to writing it.
Well, I grew up in central Illinois, midway between Chicago and St. Louis in Champaign, and at an age too tender to make life-shaping decisions, I had to choose between being a Cub fan and a Cardinal fan. For reasons that now elude me, I became a Cub fan. All my friends became Cardinal fans and grew up cheerful and liberal, and I became a gloomy realist and a conservative.
Well, George, is being a Cubs fan kind of like being a Republican now when it comes to national elections, that we may never win one of these again?
No, in the first place, the Republicans, I guarantee, are going to win a national election before the Cubs win the World Series. I don't think the Republican Party's in desperate shape at all in national politics. The Cubs are another matter. Yesterday they played a doubleheader in New York and didn't score.
Some things never change.
Well, and we go back to this, George, and of course, superstition remains the part of baseball. For the Cubs, is there a literal scapegoat involved in this back, early in the 20th century? What
well,
has just
it
done
was
this?
It was 1945, I think, at the World Series, and I managed to write a book about Wrigley Field, not mention that.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. No, the Cubs don't even have a good curse. I mean, the curse of the Bambino that the Red Sox have, that supposedly descended upon them when they sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. The Cubs, some tavern owner showed up at the ballpark for a World Series game with a barnyard animal, and the Cubs quite sensibly told him, please take your goat and go away. They were actually very polite about it. And this is supposed to be a curse? No. I think in baseball, as in much of life, people tend to confuse bad management with destiny.
Well, as we continue on, and George, I've tried to make sense of the popularity of the game in different cities, and now when a lot of Americans are very frustrated, a lot of conservatives, I note with some amazement that whatever my political disagreements may be with the majority of Bostonians or San Franciscans, at least I see them filling the ballparks there. Is there a glimmer of hope or a common thread that weaves its way through the national pastime that can make its way into our national political discourse?
Well, I hope so, because, baseball seems to me to be the proper game for a democracy because it's the game of the half loaf. No one gets everything they want. There's an enormous amount of losing in it. Every team goes to spring training knowing it's going to win 60 games. Every team knows it's going to lose 60 games. You play the whole season to sort out the middle 42. If you win 10 out of 20 games, you're by definition mediocre. If you win 11 out of 20 games, you win 89 games, and you've got a good chance to play in October. So it's a game that involves a kind of maturity, a kind of emotional equipoise on the part of its fans to understand that when you go to the ballpark, you can't have your happiness depend on winning because, as I say, the best team's going to lose 60 times a year. That's why it's the experience of the ballpark itself. It's the experience of being in this spontaneous 3-hour community of strangers who are brought together as a kind of amiable tribe for a home game at the ballpark that is the reward itself more than just winning.
George, in terms of our national pastime, it has taken on an international dimension. You now have the World Baseball Championship to go along with what we've called for years a World's Championship in our own World Series. I want to shift gears to the top of the political agenda, if we could. The continuing debate about illegal immigration. Eric Cantor criticizing the president, saying he's not getting involved in discourse on this. And of course, Cantor incurring the wrath of, well, I guess guys like me, former members of Congress who are very concerned about border security and what is transpiring here. What do you see happening in this fight on so-called immigration reform?
I don't see much happening this year because it does divide the Republican Party, and the Republican Party doesn't want to be divided as it tries to capture the Senate. And to do this in a presidential election year, or right on the eve of a presidential election, is going to be very difficult. My view is that obviously border security is important. Control of the border is an essential attribute of national sovereignty. I think we all agree on that, and we can build on that agreement that unites left and right here. I tend to be much closer to Jeb Bush on this subject. I think immigrants are needed in our country to replenish the workforce. They're needed to bring a certain entrepreneurial spirit. I think immigration is an entrepreneurial act. It's uprooting yourself, often your family, taking a risk, going to a strange culture, and I think we have to figure out something to do with the 11 million people who are here because they aren't going home. They're just not. The American people, in their good sense and native decency, wouldn't tolerate the police measures necessary to go around and yank these people out of our communities. These are people that serve our meals in restaurants. These are people who sit next to us in church. Their kids play Little League. An enormous number of them have been here 5 years or more. They've had children here. The children are American citizens. It's an awful, thorny, messy moral problem, but it's time we confronted it with, again, a kind of flinty realism about what really is possible.
Well, George, we look forward to visiting with you again. Hopefully we can get face-to-face. I'd love to have a more in-depth discussion about this, but as always, we appreciate your time and certainly your perspective on our national pastime. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, George Will.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to get George's perspective on Wrigley Field. And if anybody has not been to Wrigley Field, it should really be on the bucket list of things you got to try. You can sit out there in the outfield, drink one of the old-style cold beers.
It's our great beer, and they can't have it, they say in Chicago. We'll see if the Cubs ever win again. We're back after this.